Cynicism is just another form of cowardice. For our sergeant are not interested in a midlife crisis. We were to do our freaking work.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 10 of the Spotlight Podcast, Success Stories for Veterans, where it is our job to break down and analyze heavy hitters in both the civilian and military communities to discover their tactics, their mindset, and their systems so that you can take those and apply them to your life. Those heavy hitters range from New York Times bestselling authors to former heads of states to other divergent thinkers who dominate their field by challenging conventional wisdom around them. And today we are sitting down with Mitch Slater. So Mitch started out as an associate producer working on air production and getting coffee for Larry King. And then he eventually moved to Merrill Lynch, where he became a senior VP and financial advisor. And he did that for 18 years. Recently, he's been working with UBS, where he is now a senior vice president of wealth management, working with high-end profile clients. And he has a ton of great information to share with you. So stick around. Let's just take that opportunity and jump in, because that's very interesting territory. And that was one of the things that I was most struck by as I was doing my background research on you, is that you made a pretty big, what I would consider from the outside looking in, to be a pretty big jump from producing or being an assistant producer on a show and then moving into the world of wealth management. Can you break down for me what was going on for you mentally during that time frame?
Yeah. I remember it. I remember it very well. I had worked, from age 17 through 26, had been in the media one way or another, or acting, which was kind of my first love. So even while I was at school in DC, I was doing some acting stuff, but I was mostly involved in radio and TV. And that's where I was interned for Howard Stern when he first got started in DC, and interned for Charlie Rose before he was doing all of his bad stuff. Or maybe he was, but who knows?
Yeah.
I just loved being radio. And then when I got the opportunity to work for Larry King right when I graduated, it was just perfect. So I was very fortunate. It kind of goes both ways. I had an amazing early 20s. I wasn't really making much money, but I was having incredible experiences working for a guy like Larry King. And then after I had an opportunity to work on a TV show in California, move out to California and do the whole LA thing for a couple of the years, and then moved back to New York for another opportunity that didn't work out, and then moved to Philadelphia for something. And that's about the time where I met my wife, now wife of 32 years.
Congratulations. Who
changed careers herself. She came out of social work and became a writer, and she works at Time Magazine. So she also made a big shift. But kind of what happened was, I was summer of 1987. We were going to get married in September in Michigan, where my wife's from. And I was sitting with my dad at the Jersey Shore on the beach, and totally out of the blue, he said something along the lines, either you're ready to get a real job now, or I think there's an opportunity you should look at, somewhere along those lines. I forget exactly how he put it. My dad, my parents totally supported everything I did. When I moved to California, I mean, they never said a word about it. I know they probably didn't necessarily want me living far away, but
yeah,
they were totally supportive. So it wasn't about that. And he started telling me about Merrill Lynch. Now you have to understand, this was a second career for my dad. My dad changed careers at age 50. He had been kind of in the corporate executive world, had some success, then went through a period of losing out in a bid for presidency of the company and being out of work. And then over a 3-year period, having maybe 3 different jobs. In fact, 1 year traveling all week and living in West Virginia and while I was in high school. So, was kind of a difficult time. And his Merrill Lynch account executive, which is what they called them in 1977, suggested he look at this. And my dad took to it very well. And I think it was a combination of timing. It was the first time that IRA accounts came out, and my dad was kind of in the right place at the right time, opening up accounts. And he did very well in his first 10 years. There was definitely a learning curve. So he brings this up to me, and I honestly said, Dad, this is absolutely the craziest thing you've ever said to me. I am so not a financial guy. You know that. I'm much more into doing creative things. And he said, yeah, well, so's your brother. And now your brother's running a brownie business. So, sometimes these things turn around. And he said, I'd love you to meet my boss, a guy named Pat Kenny, who was the manager of Merrill Lynch in Newark, New Jersey at the time. And he did probably one of the greatest sales jobs of all time. I mean, he sat me down and talked about my background. And he said, listen, kid, he said, this job is 80% communications and 20% knowledge. He said, you look out in that room there, and that was probably a big bullpen of, a lot of people. I mean, it wasn't exactly the Wolf of Wall Street or anything like that, but it was something along those lines, let's say, but in a classier version, I guess, at the time. And he said, most of those people are really, really smart, but they don't know how to pick up a telephone and they don't know how to talk to people. You have all these other skills. We'll teach you the rest. And he said, what are you making? And this is 1987. I said, well, the best year I had was, I guess, the year I worked for Larry King. I made $19,000 or something like that. And he said, how'd you like to make $100,000 within 3 years? And he gave me a book. You can make $100,000 in 3 years, literally, something along those lines.
I love those book titles that are direct and to the point like that.
Yeah, it was exactly something like that. And about to get married, I really, was totally living hand to mouth. And that sounded like a good idea. And, I think if my dad wasn't in the business, I don't know if I would have had the guts to try it. But knowing that I'd have a mentor and somebody from, day one that I could bounce things off of. And, it's very ironic or strange how things happen. It just shows you have to, no matter what, keep an open mind. And I could have easily said, no way, Dad, I'm going to go back. And, in fact, 3 months earlier, I had an opportunity to move to Sumter, South Carolina, and be like a correspondent on Good Morning Sumter or something like that. And it was, very little money. And my fiance and I talked about it at the time, but it just didn't feel right. Yeah. And kind of never looked back. I mean, I was very fortunate. Merrill Lynch had the best training program on the street at the time. I got excellent training. I met some really, really smart people that I respected in that branch. I had my dad, who was in a different branch, who could advise me. And lo and behold, I had a very strong start. And I wasn't afraid to pick up the phone and cold call people. Asking people for money was something that I had done a little bit of fundraising prior to this job. I was working for a company that was working with like universities and opera houses and raising money. And I ran a couple of those campaigns with them. So I kind of wasn't afraid to pick up the phone. And I just, I think having an early success was a big part of it, and a couple of wins and making the most out of those wins. And one thing just sort of built on another. And a lot of it's timing. It's a very different business today in 2019 than it was in 1987. Extremely different. I mean, forget, pre-internet, even personal computer. I mean, we had something on our desks called a Quotron. And it was this like brown box, which literally was like a brown box with a little keyboard. And you would type in, and the numbers were all over the place. You type in, let's say IBM, you type in an I, wait, and then it would pop up an I, a little green thing, a B, then a little B, then a little M. And literally you could go in a coffee room, get yourself a coffee, and come back, and there would be a quote for IBM. That's all we had. No research, no client information, nothing. That was where computers were in this industry in 1987. Whereas today, right here on this iPhone that I'm right here, I could do anything, just unimaginable what I, can do here. So, so kind of a long journey to answer your question is that I think I was willing to take a risk. I was open to it.
Yeah. And you talked about the fact that you're engaged during this process. And I think that one thing that gets lost in a lot of advice books and columns is the impact that those types of risks can have on your relationship. How did you keep everything balanced as you're engaged, starting a new career in a new career that's not only different from what you've experienced, but wealth management is a high stakes game. I mean, there's a lot of pressure on them. I mean, that's people's livelihoods. How did you handle that?
Well, that's a really good question. I think part of it is that my wife was going through the similar transition. She had her master's in social work from a really good school from University of Michigan, and she was working in that field and not particularly happy, and knew she wanted to be a writer, and started working for free and interning and working in magazines and little newspapers in Philadelphia and outside Philadelphia. And she had just gotten her first New York writing job working for a travel magazine. So she was going through this transition. And I think the fact that we both were going through these different transitions, I think helped. So it wasn't like, we were both, wait a minute, things were so good before you did this kind of situation, But for my dad at age 50, that was different because he went from the corporate world, and I didn't realize it at the time until I was older. But, I don't know how he got me through college and paid for it. I mean, those were tough years. Yeah. I mean, sure, they sacrificed a lot in order to have that happen.
Do you have any favorite memories that came out of that time? Because it seems to me, and this is something that veterans talk a lot about, is that kind of that shared suffering creates the bond. Are there any good memories that came out of that time frame for you and your now wife? I mean, you clearly been married for 32 years.
Yeah. I think the good memories are really sharing the successes and also sharing the challenges, and having a partner certainly to talk to. Even though we were maybe on different schedules and I was obviously working cold calling late into the night, and sometimes she was writing late into the night. But having the ability to bounce off somebody else, your frustrations as well as your successes. That I think was really helpful. I think if one of us was succeeding and the other one was failing at the time, that would have made it 1,000 times harder. And over our marriage, there's certainly been those times where one of us really loves our job and one doesn't. And we've both gone through different periods like that, or careers. And as you said, this particular the wealth management industry is very, it's very difficult. I mean, I'm not going to say I'm a doctor and I'm dealing with life or death, but for many people, their money is just as important as their health, which is a little sick, but it's just a reality. So I've always felt incredibly responsible when things go wrong. And things go, it's the Derek Jeter formula. I mean, you're a Hall of Famer if you get a hit 3 out of 10 times. And, the stock market and investing in general, it involves risk. And the most important thing is understanding somebody's risk tolerance. And that's probably the single best lesson that I learned in my early days, is understanding who the person is in front of me. And that is specifically why I never give investment advice, whether I've been on television, radio, podcasts, articles, anything that I've done in the media over the last 32 years, and it's been a lot. I've never given advice because, I don't know your situation, Carson. I'm not going to, say you should buy this or sell this. And I get asked a lot, but it's improper, which is kind of why I am not a fan of CNBC, because CNBC is an entertainment network that survives on revenue from, commercials, and they're entertainers. And Jim Cramer is an entertainer. And nothing personal against Jim. I know Jim, but that's just, the way it is. And there are people, that listen to those people and make their decisions based on that instead of and the beauty of the world today versus when I started is that you actually can look things up. Now, my wife is actually a fact checker at Time Magazine, so she knows what the facts are, and, you can Google anything and you can see 10 different sides to it, but there are certain publications and certain things that you know to trust.
Yeah, and that's a very interesting point, because that's something that a lot of veterans are experiencing is they're coming out, they're getting drowned in this what I would consider misinformation. Because I agree with you, I don't think you can give advice until you've done some type of face-to-face diagnostic with someone. But a lot of people struggle with determining who not to listen to. Do you have any type of litmus test for identifying things that you shouldn't be listening to or that you should ignore versus the things that are good?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think you have to have your own internal meter to know what's real and what's not real. And part of it is doing your homework. So there are a lot of people that could put shingles out and give advice in anything, in medical advice and financial advice, whatever. I believe a lot in references. I believe that people really should do their own homework, and not necessarily just because they have a good-looking website or a really cool Instagram account. That doesn't necessarily mean they know what they're talking about. However, if you can talk to people that work with those people, they will give you hopefully an honest opinion. I would be wary of anybody that says, I'm sorry, I don't give references. I've always been willing to give references. I'm always surprised how few people ask for them, but I know I got references when we fixed our roof. I mean, I got references to cut down a tree. I trust certain friends. So obviously some of those friends, if it's somebody that they work with, I know enough about that particular person, but you got to do your homework. I mean, I think it comes down to this great saying from a client and a friend, and probably one of the most active guys on social media, Gary Vaynerchuk. And Gary has this saying that in the age of Jetson, you still got to go Flintstone. And it's not exactly your generation, but you're probably familiar with both those references.
Absolutely.
So, it's as much as the technology is there and you can learn and you can get things, you still have to look people in the eye. In my opinion, the reason I do the majority of my podcasts right now, eye to eye, is because that's just how I work. When I take on a new client, I want to go meet them. A lot will say, no, we'll just talk on the phone. I'm like, no, I'd like to meet you. I want you to know that I'm real, and I want to know that you're real. So, picking up the telephone, going and having a cup of coffee with them, whatever it is, just doing that, those 10,000 hours, so to speak, and putting the time in and the effort in.
Yeah, I think that the art of doing your homework with person-to-person interaction has become very lost, especially on the millennial generation, because there's a temptation to hide behind technology.
Right.
And I also follow Gary Vaynerchuk, and he's spot on, because word of mouth marketing is not going away, and the ability to go in there and actually talk to somebody like a human is vitally important.
And I would think, veterans in general, those that I know, and just in general, are very, very are good planners. I mean, you can't be doing what you were doing in a helicopter, just, for example, without planning out that journey and without knowing whatever, engagement you were going to get into. You guys had a plan. And I think life and whatever you do with it, you'd have to have a plan. It always amazes me how much time people spend planning their trip to Disney World with their kids. They will spend hours and hours to make sure they get the right character breakfast with Mickey Mouse or whatever, or they will work their journey on their flights or driving, whatever it is. They will hours and hours. Yet when it comes to investing, for example, many people just listen to CNBC and go ahead and make an investment, for example, without doing research. You got to do your homework. And I actually think veterans have a huge advantage in being used to doing their homework. A lot of lazy people out there don't.
Yeah, in the spirit of doing homework, if I'm a driven and ambitious veteran and I want to maybe do some more homework and do some more research within the realm of finance, what books would you recommend that they start getting in touch with, or any resources that have helped you?
Well, there's a number, and they've changed over the years. I mean, I always go back to Peter Lynch. Peter Lynch was he still is around at Fidelity, but he's not managing money day to day. But he ran the largest mutual fund for about 25 years called the Fidelity Magellan Fund. And this is not a recommendation of that fund. I don't even think it's around anymore, actually. But what Peter Lynch did was he found the companies that he wanted to buy by being aware of what was happening around him. So when his 12-year-old daughter came home and said, I have to buy jeans at this store. There's this new store that opened, I think it was in Boston, in one of the malls. And Dad, he said, let me go see this store. And the store happened to be the Gap. And this is very, very early days of when the Gap started. And he realized what was happening and could see a trend. And then he went and did his research to see if the Gap, for example, was something that made sense for one of his portfolios. So Peter Lynch's first book, One Up on Wall Street, I think holds up as good as anything today, because it talks really about how to think through your investing. I would recommend anything by Warren Buffett or written, actually The Warren Buffett Way, which was the first biography of Warren Buffett. Robert, I can't forget his last name right now. It's a great book and really talks about his methodology. Learn from the best, So Peter Lynch and Warren Buffett, also Jeremy Siegel is a Wharton professor, and he's written a number of very, very good books. And I wish I could remember the name of one of them right now. I can get back to you with that. But he Stocks for the Long Run, actually, is the first book that he wrote. He's also written others. And then there, I also think is equally as important as the financial books are psychology books. So if I had to do it all over again and I go back to school, I would have taken not business classes, although it would have been nice to have taken some business classes. I wish I took more psychology classes, because understanding behavioral economics and understanding how different people are, men, women, especially the difference that occurs with money, because, we have this just continuing pattern of generation after generation of people not getting financial education. Maybe because it was never talked about in their homes. It certainly wasn't taught at school. I was part of a group of people that got financial literacy mandated in the state of New Jersey. So in high school, kids have to take an elective. It's something. At least they learn what a checkbook is and what a mortgage is. Very basic things. So I'm actually going to throw a book out, which I think is really, really great. It's called Broke Millennial. Her name is Erin Lowry. I interviewed her on my podcast. And Erin is, and she's got 2 books out now, but her first book really talks about how she survived in New York City, the side hustles that she did, and how she just figured out a way to not be in so much debt. And she talks about everything from her life to starting a relationship with somebody. She has this great saying about getting financially naked when you meet someone, because realistically, you marry somebody with a lot of student loan debt, you're marrying that debt. And I'm not saying that she actually did marry somebody with student loan debt, but she was smart and helpful in figuring out how to, work with that. So she also writes a column, I think, and she's done videos. But for somebody today in the millennial generation, I think she's done really the best job that I've seen in a book form that really, really helps you with that. That's probably, I think a great way. As far as psychology, there are books on men, women, and money that are out there. And there's a book that I just saw that was recommended to me that I have in my office. It's written by a Canadian, I think, psychologist who teaches in Toronto. And I'm trying to get the title. It's a clever title. It's something like Women, Sex, and Money. I mean, just to make it sound better, but I started reading it and it's really, really well done and really well researched. And I will get you the name of that. I apologize. But it's very helpful in understanding how people think. So understanding the way people think or behave one way or another, whether it's in a book form, whether it's in a video form, there's probably a Khan Academy class on all of these things these days. So I just think you got to understand people, no matter what business you go into.
Yeah, and you talked about managing risk, and one thing that I see that's become very pervasive is there's two groups of people. There's the people with a more abundance-based mindset, abundance-based psychology, and then there's people with kind of a cynical, scarcity-based mindset. And it's always a competing clash of these two different brands of advice. And I'm curious, what advice do you see out there, whether financially related or otherwise, that when you see it, it just makes you want to lose your mind? You're just like, well, I wish people would really stop saying that.
Well, I think anybody who thinks life is easy is dreaming. And anybody who thinks that life is just, a straight up journey or a straight down journey is anybody giving advice like that. I think people appreciate reality. And I mentioned this earlier before we were talking, and I know this is a one-off reference, but, if people watch Springsteen on Broadway on Netflix, and yes, I am a big Bruce Springsteen fan, but he spends a lot of time talking about his journey and going through a serious depression. And here is, one of the most successful musicians of all time, made tremendous amount of money, couldn't possibly be more loved and beloved, who's in serious therapy. Howard Stern's another guy who was in therapy for many, many years. So not everything is what it looks like. And that's the biggest problem with social media, is that everybody puts their best day on social media. And that's typically what you see on Instagram. And you can blame the Kardashians for that. And somehow one of the Kardashians has turned it into $1 billion business, selling all kinds of stuff to people that just buy it because it's her for whatever reason. Just people need a reality check, and anyone that tells you, life is easy is lying. I mean, it's not a straight up journey. I mean, the stock market doesn't go straight up. It's a zigzag, and you're going to have great moments and you're going to have tough moments, and realizing and getting the tools to get through the tough moments really is more of the secret to life than anything else. And however you can get those tools, whether it's through, therapy, whether it's through, social workers, whether it's through friends, whatever, don't ever be afraid to seek out advice. I mean, that's kind of, people have a lot of pride, and I understand that. And I certainly have a lot of pride, a lot of ego. But I know that I need advice. And I think it's why I had a business coach for many, many years, because I need somebody to run some of these ideas by. This business coach has helped me make some very challenging decisions and helped me avoid some real potholes. And I think had I had a business coach throughout my career, I would have avoided a lot of other potholes. Everyone needs a coach.
Yes.
I mean, whether you're training for the World Cup or whether you're, in business, you need a coach, you need a mentor, you need somebody, the older I get, the more real it is to me. As a kid or in your 20s or 30s, you meet somebody my age, 59, and you think, what do they know? I mean, I used to think when I walked through the office at Merrill Lynch and there'd be a guy there in his 60s, like, he has no idea. I know what's happening. I'm on the cutting edge. Well, he probably, knew so much more about people than I ever knew.
Yeah.
And I was fortunate. Like I said, I had someone 33 years older than me, my dad, who had been through a lot of this, who could give me solid advice. I have a brother who's 8 years older than me, who's been in business, but more from the marketing side, who's given me great advice. I think you have to be open to listening to other people, and you have to stop believing your own BS all the time.
Yeah, I completely.
And trust me, I could BS with the best of them, but I have to be realistic. And like I said, the older I get, the more it means.
Yeah, I think having your BS detector finely tuned is very important, especially your own. And I tell people all the time, if I'm the one that's BSing you, don't listen to me either, right? If you think that this is not the advice that you need. But tell me, what is something that you think, or that is absolutely or absurd or unusual that you really love? So instead of the bad advice, something that you really love that you wish more people knew about.
Well, it's interesting. Claude Silver, who's Gary Vaynerchuk's chief heart officer, which is what they used to call HR, but she's more than that. I mean, she really keeps people balanced at their company. She said something to me when I interviewed her that has really stuck with me. And she said to me, she says, Mitch, do you know who the most important person in the room is? And the answer is the room. And, I think she was referring to something in a book called Radical Candor, which is an excellent book about kind of the psychology of being motivated at work in general. But you have to check your ego at the door. And we have 2 ears for a reason. And being able to be a good listener is, I think, something that just, it seems so obvious, but very, very few people, including me, many times, I like to hear myself talk. And while I'm listening to myself talk, I'm missing what someone is saying that is giving me a hint on that might help me manage their investments, may help me manage some other things in their financial life, or in my own personal life, listening to my kids, listening to people in my family, listening to my friends, and not always feeling like, I'm the smartest person in the room, because the room is smarter than me.
Yeah, Carl Sagan had a great quote about how hard it is to know something, and basically how it's impossible. And that, for me personally, that's the mantra I use, because to your point, you can't think that you're the smartest person in the room, and that's one that I hang on to. But I'm fascinated by the idea of the most important person in the room is the room, and that's actually a really great insight. Is there any last pieces of advice that you would love to give to veterans that you think can really propel them forward, that you want them to know?
Well, I think we live in a time, at least I feel like we live in a time that veterans are more respected than ever, maybe since World War II. And it may not seem like that way at times. Certainly didn't the other day during the impeachment hearings, without getting political. But I think there's a lot of respect and well-deserved respect. So I do think that it's something to be proud of, and you should speak up about it. And given a situation, I would think when somebody can hire someone, knowing that background, it would make a big difference. So, have confidence and believe in yourself. And also know that if you're having a bad day, so are probably 5.7 billion other people in the world. And that your bad day may seem like it's the worst bad day, worse than anyone else. But everyone's having money problems. Everyone's having social life problems. Everyone's having work problems. Everyone's, having drug and alcohol and everything else that's going on out there. You're not alone, and that's, I would think that, to me personally, that's the most upsetting thing about my understanding in working with some veterans. And we have an armory in our town, and a friend of mine runs all these different events. And, sadly, the suicide rate is so high amongst veterans. And I just wanted to, let people know that they're not alone. There is help. You just have to be able to reach out and get over your pride, and get over yourself. Because like you said, you're not alone out there.
Yeah, and I think that we can use this conversation as an example just for other veterans who are listening out here. I mean, if you ask somebody for help, even a stranger from LinkedIn, and we didn't know each other from anybody else, and here we are in this conversation, and I've been unbelievably surprised with how many people say yes. If you say, "Hey, I'm looking to do this. Here's what I've done so far, but I don't know what I don't know. Can you help get me on the right track?" I'm batting 100% when I've asked people like that. And
I'm not surprised. And you have to ask. I mean, that's, you don't get if you don't ask. I mean, that's rule number one in sales. You got to ask for the order. And life is full of asking for the order. And, I'm doing the same thing with my podcast now. I mean, there's a lot of guests that I've had that I just, people, oh, come on, they're not going to do your show. No one who cares. And they will, because I took the chance. And you have to be able to ask for help. And I would certainly offer to anybody that's listening to your show, if they're thinking of getting involved in the financial services world, reach out to me. You could put my email down. I will certainly respond. I love helping people. I love mentoring people. Veterans certainly would go to the top of the list. Because they've made a much bigger sacrifice than I've ever made in my life. And I don't be afraid to ask for help. It's out there.
Thank you so much, Mitchell. And last piece, do you want to take a moment to plug your podcast for a second?
Sure. The podcast carries the same name as my radio show, which was Financially Speaking with Mitch Slater, which was a syndicated radio show I had in the 90s out of New York. And even though the show is called Financially Speaking, and I do work for a major financial service firm, it is not an investment-related show. It is really a show about people and interesting people and hearing their stories, similar to what you're doing, but with a business spin. So I have a passion for Bruce Springsteen. I've interviewed his main videographer, Tom Zimney, who directed all of the videos and movies, including Western Stars, which is out right now. Danny Clinch, who has been his main photographer for the last 20 years, taking every album cover, every great picture you've seen of Bruce Springsteen. I like bourbon. So I interviewed the CEO of an up-and-coming bourbon manufacturer, a very small batch bourbon company, Pinhook Bourbon, because I wanted to learn more about the process and the business of bourbon. And I like topics too. You know, I want cord cutting, for example, is something we're all thinking about. So we took a little deeper dive there. And we're going to take a deeper dive in a couple of weeks in sustainable investing. So there's all kinds of topics on the show. Occasionally you'll have a celebrity like Larry King, who I know and fortunately can go sit in his living room and chat with. But really it's trying to give people something that they can walk away from after their 20-minute dog walk, which is typically when I listen to my podcasts, or on a long car ride, that they can say, oh, I didn't know that. And the last thing I'd say about it is the best lesson that I learned from Larry King, which I try to do on my show, is be curious. And you seem like you're a very curious person and with the questions you've asked, and it is your show, and you have the ability to try to put yourself into the audience's head. And what are they thinking, knowing that they're talking to this person who runs a bourbon company or whatever? And, you know, be curious and ask questions that others may be thinking about. So we try to have a lot of fun and mix it up a little bit. And the show is available on Spotify. It will be on Apple Podcasts soon. And it's also available directly through my UBS show page. And I welcome anybody to listen anytime. Or if you have an idea for a guest, please let me know. I am always looking. I just set up an interview with the CEO of JetBlue from somebody who recommended it to me. So recommended him to me, who has a book out. So you never know.
Yeah, that carries a lot of weight if you can say, hey, I've got people in my audience that would love to hear from you. So, yeah. Mitch, thank you so much for coming on. Veterans, if you're listening, send Mitch questions. If you want to get involved in the financial industry, he's out there. And if you just want to test the waters a little bit, go listen to his show. Mitch, have a great day.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Hey everyone, thanks again for listening to another episode of the Spotlight Podcast. And I just wanted to take a second to ask you who you think should be interviewed on the show. Who do you think is out there that's just absolutely crushing it that the veteran population needs to hear from? That's what we want to hear from you. Send us your suggestions to spotlight@thezenveteran.com. That's SPOTLIGHT @thezenveteran.com. Thanks again for listening.